waves reach the French shores calmly, and the temperature is perfect for a stroll along the paths that surround the beaches. But there are several difficulties. On those roads, there are bunkers armed with 88mm guns. Further back, there are machine gun nests and trenches, and dozens of anti-tank obstacles can be seen on the beaches. The day is none other than Tuesday, June 6, 1944. At approximately 6:30 a.m., the first wave of Allied ships will begin the Normandy landing, the largest amphibious invasion in history. For decades, this event has been regarded as the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany's ambitions in World War II. Therefore, it is time to ask ourselves, what was D-Day? And why was it such a fundamental movement for the evolution of the war? Join us in this new episode of Military History, in which we'll relive the development of one of the most epic battles in history. Are you ready? Then prepare to travel back in time. In June 1940, Adolf Hitler's Germany had practically all of Europe in its hands. The question was, how could the Allies even think of a full-scale invasion? But it turns out that such an invasion was actually possible. The Battle of Britain in 1940, the Royal Air Force's vital triumph over the Luftwaffe, was the starting point. Then came the recovery of the regions of North Africa and much of Italy by the British and Americans, and also came the unstoppable Soviet advance from their victory at Stalingrad. It was then that Franklin Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin convinced British Prime Minister Winston Churchill to set the invasion date once and for all. Thus was born Operation Overlord, a plan commanded by U.S. General Dwight Eisenhower, who called it a Great Crusade to liberate Europe. The invasion was planned for May, but then it was decided to expand the number of divisions, something that needed more preparation and equipment. Therefore, June would be the month, with Monday the 5th as the original D-Day. However, bad weather delayed it to Tuesday the 6th. The experienced English General Bernard Montgomery would be in charge of all ground troops. Facing the Allies was Hitler's Atlantic Wall, a series of fortifications and devices that stretched from southern France to northern Norway. However, it relied on outdated strategies and tactics. So while the Allies anticipated heavy casualties, they also hoped to break through German defenses that had been completed by Erwin Rommel, Montgomery's rival in the African campaign. Finally, a name and a nation were assigned to each of the 5 chosen beaches of Normandy. Omaha and Utah would be in charge of the Americans. Golden Sword would be from the British, and Juno would remain for the Canadian forces. All of them would be accompanied by French, Polish, New Zealand, Norwegian, Australian, and Czechoslovak soldiers, among others. In turn, those would be assisted by special vessels to clear the English Channel of underwater mines. Of the 2 million soldiers who had been training on English soil, 156,000 would go to those 50 miles of sand. 10,000 vehicles would be added, including Sherman M4 and Churchill tanks adapted to sweep mines or destroy bunkers. Operation Neptune, the naval part of Overlord, moved these troops aboard almost 7,000 ships. Among them, there were more than 12,000 warships and 4,000 landing boats, where seasickness was very frequent. In all, 39 Allied divisions would attack the beaches. On June 6th, and around 0630, the ramps of the first amphibian finally opened on Omaha Beach, revealing the shaking M1 Garand rifles of the American troops. But first, we must go back in time, because there were 2 particular movements that were essential to achieve success. The first one, Operation Bodyguard, occurred during the previous months. It was a huge distraction to simulate an invasion elsewhere, mainly Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest area between England and France. To achieve this, and during Operation Fortitude, the Allies employed different methods, from fake equipment and double agents to a ghost army commanded by the famous General George Patton. According to historian Stephen Ambrose, the German confusion was remarkable. At dawn, no one really knew if the terrifying sight of thousands of ships on the Normandy beaches was real or just some other distraction. The second movement took place just 6 hours before the landing. More than 24,000 American, British, and Canadian paratroopers landed at different points behind enemy lines. Their task would be to gain control of the main accesses to the beaches and crossroads, as well as to neutralize anti-aircraft and anti-tank guns. Under German fire, the U.S. 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions excelled by overcoming multiple launch failures and the initial disorganization. With the area secured, the mission became a symbol of the Allied forces, which used more than 11,000 aircraft. Now, let's go back to the beaches packed with explosives, ramps, Czech hedgehogs, and other imposing obstacles. The fire from the ships had not succeeded in decimating the German defenses, while the more than 2,000 aircraft that had bombed the coast after midnight were not very successful either. Still, the British and Canadians met little resistance and managed to advance on fortified towns, as did the Americans in Utah. The flip side of this was Omaha. Of the 4,400 Allied deaths, about 1,500 occurred there alone, not counting thousands of wounded and missing. Many drowned under the weight of their own weapons, and others were mutilated by mines that covered almost the entire territory. In addition, several of the units in the first wave lost 60% of their men. The treacherous waters, the halting of the naval bombardment, and the surprise presence of a larger number of Nazi troops directed the fate of Omaha toward an almost disastrous one. The situation was so dark that the Americans came close to retreating. Meanwhile, where was Hitler? He was just sleeping. When he was informed of the situation, he trusted that bad weather and his forces would easily defeat the Allies. It was only at noon that he agreed to dispatch the Panzer tank divisions that were in Paris, although it was already too late. As for the weakened Luftwaffe, nothing could cope with the renewed air power of the enemy. Gradually, and with the action of the 1st Infantry Division, the Americans consolidated the head of the beach, although 3 more days would pass before completing their objectives. In fact, only Juno and Gold were connected at the end of a day that saw 9,000 casualties on the German side, 10,000 in the Allied sector, with 185 tanks disabled or destroyed, and thousands of French civilians killed. We must mention that it is impossible to consider the success on the beaches without, for example, Pointe du Hoc, where the Rangers scaled cliffs to eliminate a coastal battery that pointed towards the landing sites. In addition, the Allied disorganization was detrimental to the German army, which had to be fragmented to face each situation. Coming to the end of this video, we must add that some sources highlight the psychological value that D-Day had not only for the war, but also for the history of mankind. For example, Keith Huxon, director of the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, says that the invasion had to be successful. There was no plan B. If it had failed, today we would have a very different 21st century. But now, it's your turn to answer. Do you think that D-Day was the event that decided the fate of World War II? Or do you think there was another more decisive battle? Leave us your comment below. We also invite you to subscribe and activate notifications to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history. Thank you very much for joining us, and until the next video.